Hello everyone, and welcome to another IMG VMR. My name is Ibrahim Omer, and I am a medical student based in Saudi Arabia and a CP Solvers member. And I'm very happy to be moderating today's session alongside my friend Mariana. Today, we're joined by Dr. Andrew Gutwein, who's the program director of the Internal Medicine Residency at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, New York. He's held this position since July 2009, leading a team of over 100 internal medicine physician house staff. He completed his undergrad degree at NYU, earning a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Pre-Med, followed by his MD from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Prior to his role at Jacobi, he served as the program director at Westchester Medical Center and held the position of associate program director there as well. So welcome, Dr. Gutwein. It's good to see you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And so, Dr. Gutwein, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience, share a bit more than what I've shared about you already.
Well, I guess I could add that I've been here at Jacobi for over 15 years now, and consider this kind of job, a program director position, to be more of a calling, a career, as opposed to what many program directors do it for 3 or 4 or 5 years and then move on to something else, maybe a section chief, maybe a vice chair, or even a chairman or dean at a medical school. I've really never even applied for any of those jobs, and I really am here to support the residents, teach the residents, guide the residents, and hopefully that comes through and they feel that I'm really supportive to them.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Gutwein, for being with us today. And just to do an icebreaker, I would like to ask you, would you like to share with us a fun fact about yourself?
I don't remember if you guys asked me that the other time I was on the show, but I guess the main fun fact is that I'm a martial artist for 37 years, but I'm barred contractually from hurting any house staff physically, so don't worry. I'm also a poker player.
Oh, that's nice. So is there like a specific martial art that you practice commonly, or?
It's a private style that none of you would have heard of, but it mixes together lots of different styles, starting with Shotokan, Japanese straight motion martial arts, and at higher levels, going on to Okinawan and Chinese motion that's more circular.
That's super cool, actually. I'd love to learn more about that one day. So I guess just because today's session is more about IMGs and application to internal medicine, I was wondering, Dr. Gutwein, for those who haven't heard about Jacobi before, could you please give us a brief overview of your program, its structure in general, for the applicants of this year?
Right. So this program is about 70 years old, and we have 34 first years, 34 second years, and 34 third years. We've done away with our prelim track a few years ago in order to change over to a 6+2 schedule. For those that don't necessarily know what these X plus Y schedules are, as they're referred to, it means you do a certain amount of time of something, X amount of time of floors or elective or whatever unit, and then Y amount of time of ambulatory training. 6+2 happens to be a very common one, although there's many versions of it. 4+2, 3+1, 5+1. There's all sorts of versions of it. I've always felt that the 6+2 was the best version of it, kind of giving just the perfect balance of amount of time necessarily in dwell time in ambulatory, the +2s, as opposed to +1s, versus still giving you enough leeway to have enough elective time for people to really do robust amounts of both clinical or research electives in whatever fields of interest they have. Because let's face it, most people are coming then thinking about going into a fellowship afterwards. And it's really important to consider the program's ability to give you those research and clinical electives. So I think the 6+2 is perfect. And when we eventually finally got to the spot where we were able to pull off that change, it involved getting rid of the prelim track to make it happen. So we unfortunately don't have prelims anymore. But I think what we've been able to build because of that change has been really fantastic. and that the house staff really have a great opportunity to both learn inpatient and outpatient medicine, and yet have enough time to do both clinical and research electives here at Montefiore. We're actually just started in the last, I want to say, few months to add away electives as well in some other areas, Mount Sinai in Manhattan, Metropolitan in Manhattan, things like that. We're continuing to improve that as well. And so I think we offer a good mix of those three areas. Is that what you were looking for, or something else I can address?
Yeah, that definitely answers my question. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so to move on, Dr. Gutwein, we have a classic question for you. What is Jacoby looking in a strong applicant?
What does Jacoby look for? So we sat down and kind of brainstormed about this about 5 or 6 years ago. Like, people always ask this on the interview day, so why don't we just tell it to them up front during my presentation that I do for about 55 minutes at the beginning of each interview day. I think I may have put this in my slideshow for our open house that we had 3 weeks ago, or whatever it was. So the person who's like really responsible and diligent and reliable, that's really got to be a key thing for Jacoby, because we give people more autonomy than really almost any residency in the United States, probably of any specialty at this point, because the autonomy has largely been eroded in the United States over many decades for lots of reasons. The hospitals that have been sued over time by patients where there are errors of care, things like that, and how they're gun shy to give responsibility to the more junior learners. Also because of the exponential growth of the hospitalist movement, where maybe people haven't been as careful to develop it the way we have as hospitalist educators, supporting our house staff's decisions, as opposed to running the teams and making sure the house staff do what they say. This is the kind of place, like, it's more of a throwback to 30, 40, 50 years ago, where the residents are pretty much expected to run the teams, lead the show, make decisions. When Dr. Felice got here as a new chairman 10 years ago, a little over 10 and a quarter, 10 and a third years ago, one of the first things he said to me, he said, "Andy, my name is Andrew, but a lot of people call me Andy. This is kind of like it was in Boston when he was in residency 45 years ago. It's about 45. Yeah, about 45 or so years ago. Back then, there was autonomy in many, many programs, including Jacoby. And when I was a medical student here at Einstein 20 some odd years ago, the Jacoby residents were kind of that model I saw. I was like, wow, these guys can do anything. And he was saying that this is what it was like back when he was in residency 45, 50 years ago. And we maintain that to this day. You have faculty you're going to round with, of course, but they're there to support your decisions. In fact, a good example of this, people always ask, can I have an example of it? When people are on call here, your long shift that goes into the evening every fourth day on the floors, our house staff are expected to do those admissions, and then the patient only gets presented the next day on rounds. So that person could go up to 24 hours without being seen by the attending. Whereas most residencies in the US, you're expected to present immediately, call up the attending or find the attending physically and tell them what's going on, and then they can tell you what they want done differently. Our house staff run the show for that first, let's call it 3 to 24 hours, depending on what time of day that person gets admitted. And obviously, if they really don't know how to handle something, there's always a backup person they can go to. There's an ICU attending around 24/7, 365. We have a nocturnist that's busy doing some things, but you can always go to them if you need help, etc. But for the most part, our house staff are, A, they're expected to do that, and B, they're that good that they can do that.
You actually read our mind, Dr. Gutwein, because the next question was specifically pertaining to the resident autonomy and responsibility at Jacoby. So thank you so much for already answering that, I guess.
I can go further on the original question then, because now that I've ruined your next question, let me go back to the question that I was just asked, because that person who was diligent, responsible, and reliable, that kind of thing, that's only one part of what I would say is the person that's optimal for Jacoby. Loving a challenge, the fast pace, because this is a public inner city hospital. This is a place you really get to learn by doing. There's lots of admissions. There's lots of patients. You're, like I said, very responsible to take charge. This is the kind of place, and you should reflect on that. It's not for everyone. For Jacobi, just because you want to get into a place that gets you into a good fellowship or that has good training doesn't mean you want to be here. You might think, to yourself, I know me. I know I need a place that's a little bit slower, maybe has a little bit more hand holding, maybe is, just gives me a little bit more, I guess hand holding is probably the best word for it. But Jacobi is kind of, the opposite. We need that person who's really going to thrive on taking charge and responsibility and things like that. And then other things is, because of our connections to the Einstein Medical School, to research opportunities, to research electives that not every program gives people, like we give people, we tend to attract people that are more research motivated, that tend to have a background in research, that tend to have an academic kind of pursuit, maybe more likely to get people that are looking towards academic jobs in the future, becoming faculty at places, not private practice, although we have people coming out and doing both, of course. And that's something that the applicants to Jacobi might want to consider seriously, is getting some sort of research built up so that they can get noticed for this kind of program. If you're applying to smaller programs, maybe programs that don't have that much academic connection, you're probably going to get interviewed without even having, as much of that robust background. But at a place like Jacobi, and I'm sure we're not the only one, but we're definitely one of those, where we're going to look more heavily on research background for people than maybe the average program. Having said that, we do have people come here that have only a small research background. I look more holistically than maybe the average person. So maybe that rounds out the question a little bit more that you had previously asked, since I ruined your next one.
You didn't actually answer it perfectly. Thank you so much. And so I guess this brings me to another question. Sometimes there are certain cutoffs that are not really said in public. Those could be pertaining to scores, number of research items that a person has, number of years that they have been on since they've graduated med school. And so I was wondering if you could please reflect on all of those cutoff criteria and if you think they apply to your program.
Yeah, we're pretty straightforward about that. I wish every program was as straightforward as we try to be. On our website, I believe we literally say that it should be a first time pass for each of the step 1 and step 2, and that step 2 should be 240 or higher. And honestly, if you have below that, you probably should save your money, because I know it costs IMGs a lot of money to apply to frequently 100 or hundreds of programs for some people, and it's not fair if we're misleading people as program directors, and then we get to say, oh, I have 6,000 applicants just to look good, like a program is looking strong because they have a lot of applicants. I would be completely fine if we only had 2,000 applicants or whatever, but it was just the people that meet the criteria on our website, so they're not wasting money applying here. The 240, I think, was I'll explain it a little bit. I think it was a very reasonable choice because besides the fact that we're on average a more competitive program than most of the internal medicine programs for IMGs specifically, if you look, the average now for someone taking step 2 is closer to 250. Maybe 251. I saw Dr. Carmody, I believe his name is a program director at another program that runs an active Twitter handle. Like I said, can't do the X thing. And I look at his also. I think he does a great job. And 250 or 251 was on one of his tweets as some of the most recent data out there. So 240 really gives us a chance to still be a broad program to look at people that may have been even just a little bit below average, maybe 40th percentile and up or something like that, or 38th or whatever it comes out to at 240. And yet maybe they still make up for that with showing that they were among the top 10% of their class, or they had an expansive experience in their resume, showing incredible work in a residency in their country, or in a research position, or getting a master's in public health, or getting a PhD even occasionally, other things that might make up for a small lapse, bringing them down from the average of their step. So I think what we do is relatively optimal, putting it on our website and not holding people to being only in the upper half of the steps. Having said that, if you only have in the 230s, we do have a little bit of allowance for that, simply because if one of our current residents knows you well and can say, no, I worked with this person's fantastic, you need to interview them. They say that to me, I'm going to even interview them probably into the 230s. So even then, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. As for year of graduation, that tends to be another big bugaboo for many program directors. They'll say, let's say year of graduation 5 or less years out of medical school. And I tend to cast a much wider net than that. Our current record, I believe, is one of our 3rd years. It was either 11 or 12 years out of medical school. But this guy's resume showed he was not even just having finished a residency in his country, I believe it's Ethiopia. He was literally running the residency after finishing the residency. I mean, this was an impressive resume. So I did not let that year of graduation dissuade me from interviewing him, and we did ultimately match him, as I just said. He's a 3rd year now, and he's absolutely stellar. I think people should be a little bit more loose on the year of graduation, but most people are more like 5 years, just so you realize it. We look mostly up to 8 years, but like I said, even further at times. If you have the right application, I'll take a peek through it and maybe find those diamonds in the rough that are a little bit further out of medical school. So let's see, steps, year of graduation. Some people also ask about step 3. I should go back to the steps for a second for step 3. And they say, should I take it or not? Or what number do I need? Or things like that. So my suggestion to you guys is, if you got a really good score on step 2, let's call it 250 and higher, but for me, maybe 240 and higher, whatever. Taking step 3, probably not necessary to get noticed. But if you got a lower score, you're someone in the 230s, 220s, you can make up for that, sort of not optimal step 2 score by taking step 3 and getting a better score on that. Now, most program directors that have more experience like myself, maybe not the people that are, only there a year or 2 in the job, but certainly anybody who has more experience like me, will know that step 3 is harder to get a high score. So what I would consider a good score on step 3 is 20 points below what people got on step 2. So maybe for me, a 220 would be a cutoff on step 3, because 240 was the cutoff on step 2. So if you're getting, let's say, a 235 on step 2, and you take step 3 to try to show better, and you can get a 235 on step 3, actually, to me, then step 3 becomes more important. And it shows me maybe that's somebody I should pay attention to, even though their step 2 was suboptimal. And let's face it, step 3 is much more clinical and maybe more reflective of how somebody might do in a residency program, or how their medical knowledge is clinically and not just in basics. So in that sense, it could carry a lot more weight and really make up for somebody with a small red flag in their file. A bigger red flag, like failing a step, I don't know if it'll do anything. But I would consider like a low step 2, maybe a small red flag where something could make up for that. All right, so you said year of graduation, steps, and there was one more thing you said in there, like resume. Is that what you asked to comment on?
Yeah, and so really just any cutoffs that you think may apply to your program or any other residency program.
So the resume is harder to talk about cutoffs per se, but myself and a couple of other program directors, not just in internal medicine and other specialties, we met with the ERAS virtually. They interviewed me and a couple other people about how they can better set up ERAS so that program directors can look through the resume more optimally, because it's kind of a bit of a jumble. Especially the research is they're showing things like, a person who did a 3rd author poster at a college level, like a medical college level showing in the same groupings that they have on a 1st author poster at an international gathering. It made no sense how they were putting it. It just was hard for us to figure out, what did this person really do that meant something, that was like really a lot of work and a lot of impressive effort. We'll see this year how they change things. We met with them a few months ago, and I hope they adjusted it. From what I'm told, they did. And I think, therefore, it might make it easier for the program directors to get a better feel for what you did that really made a difference or that was impressive. So list those things first, your things that you were, putting high in, that we would consider high in your list. Like somebody asked in the chat, I saw it go by a minute ago, like what was the number of research projects? I'm less focused on the number of research projects. I'd be fine with one research project if that got you a first author publication. Didn't have to be in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm not, I know you're still students or just out of medical school, but I'm more impressed with that. You're at a first author something from 2 years of work on a research project rather than 5 projects that went to publication in one of those throwaway ones, the Annals of Medicine and Surgery or Curious or something like that, where you can pretty much get it published almost automatically. And you were first author in one Curious one and then 3rd, 5th, and 8th author in the other ones. And I realized that all of the authors were the same on every paper, and all of you just put each other down. And I realized that. I'm not as stupid as I look, as people say as a joke. And so I'm looking to see if people have something that's more robust, not a number of projects. And I don't know if I can speak, of course, for every program director. I'm sure I can't. But when we all talk amongst ourselves, what I'm saying now is really what tends to come out in the conversation. It's less about a number and more about a quality, not equality, a quality of the project. Is there anything else on cutoffs I could say? I'm not thinking of it right now. If somebody asks a question, I guess I'll address different cutoffs later, but nothing's popping in my head. I've had trouble sleeping for 6 months, so bear with me as I muddle through this.
No, once again, you actually answered our question perfectly. And yeah, just like you said, at the end of the session, we'd go over all the questions in the chat. So if anyone has any question, please feel free to post it in the chat and we'll read it afterwards. And so I just wanted to thank you for your extensive answer and open approach to it before moving on to our next question with Mariana.
Okay, so Dr. Gutwein, shifting towards signaling subject, we would like to ask you. So last year, you told us that 3/4 of the interview spots were directed to applicants that signaled the program, and 1/4 was for applicants that did not signal Jacobi. So with the recent change, now for internal medicine, we have 3 gold signals and 12 silver. Does that change anything for the way that you are assessing all the applicants and offering interviews?
Yeah, I think it will. This was obviously the first year we'll be dealing with that change, so I can't promise exactly how I'm going to handle it. Some of it's going to be sort of seeing how it is as I go. But back when it was 7 signals for internal medicine, that wasn't enough for most people to get that requisite 8 to 10 interviews before they could be relatively confident that they would match somewhere. That gives you like a 90-95% chance of matching that 8 to 10 interviews. Although for IMGs, it might be a little bit below 90 to 95, but all comers, AMG plus IMG, it was 90 to 95 according to the NRMP. Now that many of our program directors, myself included, again, met with the powers that be and said we really want to move ahead with a higher number of signals, and a shout out to AAIM, the Academic Alliance for Internal Medicine, the group that really gets all the program directors together in internal medicine and makes things happen. So they're the ones that get credit for really getting us to move forward to a higher number of signals. I was suggesting 10 or 12. They wound up going with 15, 12 silver, 3 gold, as you said, but I think that's great. Not only for the program directors, as we would like to see it, but I think it's great for the applicants as well, that really they'll get a chance to probably get noticed by more programs. Now, having said that, we are fortunate to be in the position where we get a lot of top IMG applicants, as I said before, thank God. So when I'm looking through now, I think probably what I will do is look through all of my gold signalers. I don't know how many that'll be, and probably pick many of them that I think are top-notch IMGs, just like we're always shooting for, and only then move on to the silver signalers, take a bunch of them as well. And my guess is by the time I get done with that, I may have no spots left to really offer anybody who hasn't signaled. One thing I'm still trying to decide how to handle is if one of my house staff tell me, you know, I have a person I want you to consider that I'm vouching for them, but that person didn't signal. What do I do with that exactly? I think probably the signal now is going to mean even more to me because of just how many you guys now get. And if somebody really didn't signal, I have to go with either A, they're probably on average not as strong an applicant, or B, they've self-selected as someone who knows that they have less of a chance of getting in here, maybe because they aren't as strong an applicant. And either way, it just means to me that I should probably not be using up too many spots. But again, still thinking about all of this, I don't know exactly for sure how it's going to come out. For all I know, maybe I get less signals than the previous years. I think last year we got 1,800. No, it was 18%. 18%. That's why the 1,800 was in my brain. 18% of the people that applied signaled for Jacobi. So that's out of like 6,000 and change. That's a good. Actually, that probably does come out to a really 1,300, 1,400, something like that. It comes out to. So if I get, you know, the same amount, I'd be shocked. I would figure if we're having double the signals from 7 up to 15, more than doubling, I would imagine we're going to get much more than 1,400. We might get 2,000 or whatever, something like that as a guess. And then maybe that's the perfect number, because I can look through 2,000 applicants. I can look through about 2,500 just because I have the experience to pull that off. Most programs are not looking through as many as I am, but I literally spend the 5.5 weeks from when it opens until November whatever. I think this year we're starting November 7th with our first interview date, and I can pull that off. I spent about 128 hours looking through the applicants to get through about 2,000, 2,500 applicants. So if we only have 1,500 signal us or 2,000 signal us, I will have the bandwidth to look through some of those non-signalers. But if we had already accepted so many that we don't need to, then I'm not sure it'll, you know, there's any utility to me looking through them at that point. We're only going to be able to offer about 260 interviews, give or take. Now that we've changed over since COVID to doing 2 interviewers per applicant. Before that, we had only done in person, and we'd only done 1 interviewer per applicant. Because of the fact that it went virtual, we decided to go to 2 interviewers per applicant so that we could pick up on more and really get a better feel for people, because we were probably going to lose the getting a feel for people by doing virtual. So we figured maybe that would make up for it. And I think that was great. We loved going to 2. It wound up being fantastic for us to really get a feel for people. I think that was a great move for us. But it also made it harder to find enough faculty to do as many interviews. So we only do 13 applicants per interview day on 20 interview days. That comes out to about 260 people that we can interview. So we used to do more than that. We used to do even up to 400. Of course, that was with prelims, where we had to do more to, you know, interview prelims also. But even after we got rid of the prelims, you know, it was a 360 or 300, and now we're down to 260. So it's just not as many. And I feel bad for the people that do signal us and then don't get an interview, and they feel like they wasted a signal on Jacobi. You know, at least you should know I'm going to look through every single signaler. If you signaled us but you already failed step 2 3 times, okay, fine, fair enough. I'm not going to look at your file, so don't signal us. You know, don't waste your signal. But I will plan on looking through every single signaler if we have what I think will be about 2,000 signalers. Is there any other part of that I can answer on the signaling? Oh, right. There is one other part of it. People ask, like, what's the technique? How should I send my gold or my silver? You know, should I be sending all of those to my safety programs, or all of those to my reach programs, or divide it up in a certain way? Again, nobody really knows the optimal way to do this. This is obviously very new for internal medicine. I would suggest that you probably only use 1 gold at most, maybe even 0, for those reach programs where you really think it's probable I won't get in. And maybe, you know, so like at most 1 gold, and probably 2 golds for your standard programs that you think you have a good chance of getting into. The silver, probably, again, most of them for the programs that you think you have a good shot of getting into, and maybe only a few of them for safeties or for the reach programs, maybe 2 or 3 at most for the safeties or the reaches, especially this first year where we don't know how things are going to go. I don't want to tell people to be too, to take too many risks. It's your money, your time, your life. I don't think we should be counseling people to take too many risks, especially for IMGs. And maybe after we have a couple of years under our belt, we can better counsel people how to use those signals. But for now, that's what I would do. Maybe 1 gold on a reach, couple of them on the ones where you have a pretty good shot, none of the gold on safeties. Those like easy to get into ones, the programs that get almost no signals. If you look at the graphs that I guess it was ERAS put out last year or in the last few months or whatever it was, they showed that there is only a small percentage of the programs getting a lot of signals, and it goes down and then comes kind of across and then down again, where there's a bunch of programs on the bottom end, like the bottom 20% or whatever it is of programs getting very, very little signals. And those might be obvious choices for safety ones. How you figure out as applicants exactly which programs those are is more of a mystery. Maybe figuring out which ones are in the middle of nowhere. People tend to gravitate towards bigger cities. So obviously the ones that are in more rural areas on average are less sought after. Programs that might say they have a lower step cutoff, 210, 220, or as long as you pass on the first try, that's probable they're doing that because they get less applicants to those programs. So it'd be more likely to be a safety play. So, these are tough. Now, because of signals, the onus has really become on the applicants to figure out a lot about the programs before they apply, because you don't want to waste a signal. These are precious. So looking on programs' websites, on the Residency Explorer tool that they just put out as revamped, I think it was the NRMP puts that out, the Residency Explorer tool, and really digging into that and going through it and parsing and figuring out which places you're more likely to get into or more likely match up with your needs, with your interests. It's now really on you to do a lot more research than people ever did before to figure out what are the right places. I'm not sure that's so bad. I know it puts an extra, a couple of months of really strip searching the internet, but let's face it, this is a decision that affects the rest of your life, certainly the rest of your career. And you should probably really know a lot about the places you're applying to and not just apply to 500 programs and then pray. That's not really an optimal strategy for your life. I'm not against prayer, but I think God helps he who helps themselves is a common saying I've always heard. This might be a case where that's true. Any other thoughts? I guess I'll answer in the chat questions later on that.
So thank you so much, Dr. Gutwein, for answering that very delicately. I guess I just had a question on the signals as they pertain to DACB itself. And so as a program director, now that we have multiple types of signals, gold, silver, etc., do you view all signals the same, or would you rather put someone ahead of someone else just because someone signaled with a gold rather than a silver?
I think if I spin your question into how would we use it for ranking, then my answer is I no longer care about anything to do with signaling. Not whether it was gold, silver, they didn't signal at all, doesn't matter, because all of those things and your application get you the interview. The interview gets you ranked highly. And I think I've said that on some other YouTube lecture I probably put out there in the last few years as well. And I say that to my house staff when they're applying for fellowships. Everything you did in the residency might get you to the interview for the fellowship. That interview is what's going to get you ranked highly for that fellowship. The exact same thing as for the people applying for residencies. So once you've gotten an interview at Jacobi, whether it was gold, silver, or no signal, now means nothing. It's all has to do with how we rate you at the interview, what we thought of you interactively. Yeah, I'm sure that's not a real word. In your interaction with us. How you were with the communication skills, with your ability to think on your feet, with the questions we ask you, with some of the things we saw on your resume that might have impressed us, and the answers to questions you gave based on what we asked about your resume and maybe your research or other things. Those are all the things that we're now looking for. Are you the person that we want to interact with every day for 3 years, not just the doctor that we want to have in our program. Those are so much more important now once you've gotten the interview than anything to do with signaling. And I'm willing to bet most program directors would feel like that as well. Signaling is much, much, much more useful for who we're going to interview. It's pretty much out the window once you're interviewing them. I think that's relatively ubiquitous in thought process.
Right. Yeah, and it does make a lot of sense, actually. So Mariana.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Gutwein. So I think we can start asking the questions that we have in the chat just for the sake of time. We have a lot of good questions here. So there's a question. I want to ask you how much of a role of a letter of recommendation plays in the application process. Does it matter if the LOR is from an inpatient or outpatient setting, or if it's from a specialty like emergency medicine or family medicine, or it should be focused on internal medicine?
Yeah, this is something where I definitely can't speak for other program directors, because I've heard many different opinions, lots of spectrum on this from other program directors. Some of them telling me they feel like letters of recommendation are literally useless, all the way up until more on my end of the spectrum, where I think they're actually one of the more useful parts of the application, even with the possibility of people writing AI-generated letters of recommendation. Because let's face it, when you're making an AI letter, most people are probably doing that, if they're even doing it, and then using it and then tweaking it and adjusting it, or saying to the AI, write me an outstanding letter for this guy, or for this guy, write me it was only a decent letter. And then I'm still going to be able to read into how much they thought of you with that. So hopefully people aren't using AI, but even if they do, I think I can still have some utility to that, to read into just how strong they thought this person really was. And the letters of recommendation to me are much, much more useful if they are from US doctors that you rotated with in the United States. I know, not necessarily every person is able to pull that off, but if you rotated with a US doctor in another country, or a doctor from that country in that other country, I may be able to get something from that letter, but it may be judged based on different expectations. It may be judged based on how you did with a very different population than the one that we have in the US. It may be judged on how you communicated in a different language than what we are expecting in the US. So I'd have to take it with huge grains of salt. For instance, at Jacobi, I tell my reviewers, the people that are really reading the letters of recommendation, myself, the associate program directors, even my chief residents help me. I tell them to pay the most attention to the US letters during the application review. But when we're actually interviewing the person, so now we're rereading them on the interview day or the day before, usually right before we interview the person, there we're actually reading and paying more close attention to all the letters, even if they were written by somebody from afar. So I use them a little bit differently based on the two different scenarios. And again, not every person will do that the same way. As for whether it should be externships, sub-internships, observerships, virtual rotations, all of those kinds of things, you can imagine that it's a hierarchy going from the bottom of the list, like a virtual rotation, all the way up to like a hands-on sub-internship, or now some places call them acting internships, that you may have gotten when you rotated to not Jacobi, we don't have the outside reviewers, rotators, but to some program in the United States, straight from your medical school, like during your medical school, getting a rotation there, being like one of the strongest things, because you're integrated on the team, you're getting to really do and think and make decisions and tell people your thought process and get proper letters from the US that are pretty optimal. So you can't fault us, I think, for us weighing certain ones more heavily than others. I'm sure you can see it from our side of the table. And we can't fault you if you couldn't get the rotation because of money or some sort of restrictions from your country or whatever. We all just have to do the best we can with what we're given.
Yep. So
I'm trying
thank
to
you
think
so
if there
much.
was another part of that question I didn't answer because I rambled for a while there. Was there another part of that question? I don't remember.
Yeah, so there was another part, which was basically if the letter of recommendation comes from another physician, not an internist per se,
Oh,
an
right.
emergency medicine physician or family
Right.
medicine. How do you view
Again,
that?
I think a lot of people will answer this differently, but a good gestalt, a good general way of thinking about this would be that you can imagine that we would take even more seriously ones that are written from people in fields that are more similar. So I tend to look more heavily on the letters that are written by internal medicine, family medicine, even psychiatry, because let's face it, a lot of internal medicine deals with people that either have as their main issue or other comorbidities, being depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar. All those things tend to come into play in internal medicine as well. We in Jacobi happen to be dealing with an underserved population, and those tend to come with even more psychiatric baggage as well. So those are three fields that I might weigh more heavily, while you can imagine that I might weigh a little bit less heavily things like general surgery, maybe OB-GYN. Pediatrics is kind of maybe somewhere in between, because you're probably dealing with, even though not the kid the same, but maybe the family, the parents, similar to how you might deal with internal medicine patients. So there's a spectrum, and like I said, everybody will do it a little bit differently, but that's a sort of a broad way to think about it. We again know that not everybody can get a rotation in their area of most likely interest. So I'm still reading the ones from surgery. I'm still reading the ones from other areas, but I will weight them differently and take them less seriously or just less optimally than people from other specialties that are more akin to internal medicine.
It makes total sense. Thank you for clarifying, Dr. Gutwein. So we have a very interesting question here, and I think it's very different. So have you ever met an applicant who applied to your program in a previous cycle but didn't receive an interview?
Yes. I picture one guy in my head right now, but I think it's been 2 or 3 times. But one guy, we contacted each other just the other day, even though he graduated about 9 years ago. He was helping connect one of our residents with a research project, Alejandro Recio Bueles, nice guy, just a prince. So we interviewed him 1 year, and he didn't match with us. I don't remember why off the top of my head. It's been 9 years. And then we interviewed him again the next year because he had added to his file. I forget if it was step 3 or it might have been some research added. I don't remember exactly right now. And then we matched him in that second year. And he, of course, graduated our program, and he moved on to a Hem-Onc, I believe, fellowship, and is doing fantastic. I think he might be in Texas right now. Anyway, but that answers that. That is a possibility. To be honest, I do keep your file from the previous year if you didn't match here. So I will be able to re-reference what happened the previous year.
But if the applicant didn't receive an interview in the first place, and they apply again, do they have any chance? Do you review their application again, seeing if there was an improvement?
Oh, I answered this wrong. I answered it as, did we interview someone who didn't match and then interview them again? I think I answered your question wrong. Okay, so you're saying somebody who applied 1 year, we didn't even give them an interview, him or her, and then the next year they reapply, do they still have a chance to get an interview? And I'll give it 2 sort of possible answers, you could say. A, my memory for faces is fantastic. When I'm going through our 6,000 applicants and I look at them and I say, whoa, I know that face. It's probably because I read that application the year before and the person didn't get an interview, or maybe they got an interview and didn't match here. And I'll know to look more closely to see why we didn't interview this guy, or why this person maybe didn't match the previous year. Having said that, I still review the application. And if there's no obvious reason why we didn't interview the person the previous year, like they have maybe they have a better step 3, or maybe they have more research or whatever, maybe they have a better application than whatever I probably wasn't as impressed with the previous year, then sure, I have no problem interviewing them. I will throw out there, I told you it's only about 260 people we're interviewing. Really, it's probably about 800 people that I would have been happy with out of the 2,600 or 500 that I'm actually reviewing in more depth out of the 6,000. I will look through the 6,000, some of them much more briefly, but about 2,500 or so I'm looking in much more depth, as I said before. Out of those 2,500, it's probably 800 that deserved an interview, but we simply don't have the spots for that. It makes me feel bad. Maybe not 800, maybe it's called 600. But anyway, you get the point that there's more people that I would love to have met than I have room to meet. So it's unfortunate. And maybe that person didn't get an interview because they were among that half of the 600. So I hope people won't be disheartened and that they will still shoot for the stars. And maybe if we are your reach, maybe we could be that person that you send a signal to because you think, I want to have my chance at Jacobi.
I guess there's always light at the end of the tunnel. So Dev was asking also a question here. She was asking in terms of geographical signaling on ERAS, how does your program specifically deal with that?
Yeah, I'm less thoughtful about the geography than I am about the signaling. There are some program directors I think that maybe have given it more thought and use it in a more refined way than I do. For the most part, the geographic signaling, what I'm really just using it for is if I have those people, like I said, maybe out of 600 I really want to meet and there's only 260 or whatever that I can send an application to, an interview spot for. If somebody had said that their geography lines up with us and even free texted in a good reason, my spouse is in New York City or whatever, my family, I have several family members I'd love to be near for support during my residency in New York City, whatever, something, then that might actually give them that little edge towards somebody who didn't specify a geographic area or specifies a different geographic area. And I know that they didn't specify the Northeast because of that. So like it might help as a tiebreaker, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But otherwise, for the most part, I don't use it that much.
And that's good to know, I guess. So Mariana, moving back to you.
I'll qualify it with one more comment. We are in a very congested area. New York City, this tri-state area, even the upper New Jersey, New York City area, local Connecticut, that tri-state area, as we call it, dozens of residency programs. It's like 50 residency programs. I don't know the exact number, but whatever, it's a lot. It's probably the most dense area of anywhere in the United States, if I had to guess. So you can imagine that the geography is less of an issue to us than it might be for a more rural program or a more suburban program in one of the other states that has less of that density, where maybe they really need to know who would consider coming to that state. Whereas probably most people, not everyone, but most people would seriously consider coming to New York City. It offers so much, not even just Jacobi. Lots of the programs in New York City offer so much with regard to their abilities to connect you to fellowships, with regard to teach on an incredible population, for personal life. Broadway shows is my favorite. It's just so much to offer in this area that we can probably afford to consider the geography less than maybe the other average program. So it qualifies it a little bit.
Makes absolute sense, I think. So Mariana, back to you, my friend.
All right, thank you, Ibrahim. So another question from the chat. Dr. Gutwein, how important do you think the personal statement is?
My usual answer is minimal, that it can only hurt you, not help you. Now that I've been playing around with generative AI for the last week or so to see what it can do, I think it's even less important. I mean, you could literally have the AI write the entire thing and then just add in some little anecdote to make it sound personal and be done with it and be like, okay, I'm done. I don't suggest you do that. I think it's a terrible idea. But now it means even less than the minimal amount that it used to mean to me. I pay it minimal attention to decide who comes here, and then only the 260 that are actually interviewing do we really read it in more depth and grade it. I would say it can probably only hurt you. Now it can hurt you in two ways. In the past, it could hurt you as someone who doesn't be careful and isn't careful enough to go over the grammar or the spelling, and then we find that in there and we're like, are you kidding me? Like you just spent 5 years trying to put all your eggs together and dot your I's and cross your T's, and you didn't even go over the grammar or spell. Like that's an automatic, like, screw you. And the other way it can hurt you is if it's like this incredibly mundane, my grandfather had a heart attack, so I want to be a cardiologist. I mean, come on, you should give a little more thought to your life than that. So those are the ways maybe that it can hurt you in the past. Now it can hurt you on top of that if you used AI, and we figure that out because you can run it through AI machines. I'm now starting to get better at reading which ones are probably AI, because like I said, I've been looking at it over the last week, and we think you're just having an AI do your work for you, like also highly unimpressive. So if I were you, I would write a short one that's from the heart, that really gives specific personal anecdotes that make you relatable. Like I said, it makes you that person I want to meet, not just the doctor I want to work with. Then maybe those 1%, it'll help you. Otherwise, for the most part, it can only hurt. Sorry. I was once an applicant too. I feel your pain.
And so I guess moving on to our next question. So Patricia is asking here, how do you view letters of interest? And I guess we can expand more on that. How do you view people reaching out to you, whether prior to interviews, after interviews, or during the ranking process?
So mostly you're saying like those letters of intent that get emailed to me? That's most of that,
Exactly.
99. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't read any of those. Delete automatically. It's not that I don't care about you. It's not that I don't want to learn about you. It's just that I'm going to do that during ERAS, and I have absolutely no time for the literally hundreds of emails of intent I get every year. I don't have time for that. I'm running a 102-person residency, or during the interview season, I'm going through 6,000 applications, or if you want to be more specific, about half of them in more depth. I simply don't have time for that. I don't really know any program directors that do that. Actually, I take that back. I think I know one program director that does, but I won't give away the identity. So really, just not useful. In fact, I've seen people that send me 2 or 3 of them, like one every week for 3 weeks, or one every month for 3 months, same person. I start to remember the name and get annoyed at them. I'm like virtually annoyed. So when I'm looking through applications on ERAS, I remember the name. It's that good, my memory for names and faces at this point. It's just a trained thing after doing this for so many, I've seen so many tens of thousands of applications that you just develop a skill for it, I guess. I know it's kind of the stupidest skill a doctor can have, but I guess this is what I was born for. I don't wish it on any of you.
It is what it is, I guess. So Mariana, back to you, my friend.
All right, so Dr. Gutwein, how important it is having a subspecialty focused CV, for example, PUM and critical care, at this time when we are applying for internal medicine residency?
How important is it to have what with pulmonary critical care?
To have a CV focused for one subspecialty, for example, cardiology,
okay.
or
I see. I see. I think, again, it's hard to speak for any other program directors, but I know I'm looking for some sort of story that you're telling with your life, with your trajectory. So, you're in medical school, you're obviously busy, but you do some research project in cardiology, and you think, hey, maybe I want to go into cardiology. But let's say a year later, you change your mind and you were like really impressed with the ICU, and you rotated through the ICU and you start working on pulmonary critical care project. So does that, I guess one of the questions there is, does that look bad? Like I'm all over the place with my research. But if you're telling a consistent enough story by saying in your personal statement, here's why I was interested in cardiology, here's why I changed over to pulmonary critical care, that's fine. Nobody expects somebody to know what they want to go into from birth. I mean, that's crazy. I don't even expect people to be sure what they want to go into after they've matched here and July 1st comes and they're about to start. I want them to have thoughts about it. I want them to be really, I guess the best way to put it has to do with Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that I, again, probably have mentioned in at least one of my YouTube videos. You should read that book, and the first of those 7 habits, be proactive. You should plan your life. If your plan changes, okay, that happens to maybe almost everybody at some point in their life. But at least be planning, be thinking, be having a trajectory. And if you change it, so be it. But show me that trajectory, show me that thought process. When the person's interviewing with us and they can't give me like spontaneous thinking about, their life, their trajectory, what their goals in life are, why they want to do what they want to do. That's, to me, someone who hasn't given their life enough thought. We want to match here people that are really thoughtful about their future, about their trajectory, about their career. So I guess that gives you both sides of it. Yes, you should probably be trying to think about, which way you're going, building a resume towards that. But no, you don't have to be sure of anything. Just be thoughtful and tell us why you did what you did.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, Dr. Gutwein. And so I guess we only have 5 minutes left, but I want to make the most out of this session. And so I'm just looking at the questions that we've had from prior to this session. And one of the questions that seem to have come up is, the fact that Jacobi as a program itself and its affiliation with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine seems to have its own academic environment. And so for people who are looking into your program directly or specifically, I should probably say, how do you think that enhances the educational experience for your residents, whether in terms of conferences, board review, non-conferences, etc.?
So if I understood you, the question is, because we are in like an academic setting, like a university hospital, does that add to the different parts of the program, like lectures and other things? I think, to be blunt, that question, the answer is no. There's a different question that's more important to me where the answer is yes. So I'm going to explain that. So the reason it's no is because I think any program could be even a community program in the middle of nowhere, as long as they have their key faculty that are people that are really motivated to teach, to develop their house staff, etc. Like hopefully you can figure out from the way I talk about our residency program, they're still going to be fantastic at teaching you to be a great, well-rounded internist. You do not need the medical school. You do not need, that's fine. From the yes side of it that I qualified afterwards is if you tweak that question to, is being at the university program helpful for robust opportunities in research per se to wind up in a top fellowship? Because the top fellowships are definitely looking at who has the kind of research that matches their program. Then going to university hospital absolutely makes a difference. So for your own education to be an internist, I think it's more what you bring to that program, what their faculty bring and what you bring, rather than what the environment of university versus public or not public, community was the word I was looking for. It makes a difference. Whereas for the getting into a top level fellowship, the university thing really helps. You could go to a community program that has its own fellowships. Maybe they even have 5, 6, 7 different of their own fellowships and then stay there for that fellowship. And if that's what you want, great. I'm happy for you. But if you want to get into those top fellowships, the top quartile of fellowships, let's call it in the country, then don't just look at Jacobi, but look at all the places that have great research opportunities, that have medical schools literally on their campus, that have those connections. I just sent out an email to all of our alumni for the last 15 years to try to add even further to our connections. Like I mentioned about Dr. Recio Buelas a few minutes ago, with them getting back to me to make even more networking than we ever had before to all the top places in the country. It was an idea somebody else had from my program, not me, but I thought it was a great idea. So I sent that out just 2 weeks ago or something like that. So we're going to whole other levels of being able to connect people because of those university connections. So that's what you'll get out of being out of that kind of program, not just Jacobi, but any of the major university hospitals. But if you're happy to be a cardiologist in the community working in a private practice, which is fine, then if you get into a program that has their own cardiology fellowship and that's where you want to go, great, power to you. That's fantastic. You're going to live your life and be happy. That's what we all want as program directors, for our residents to be happy in what they wind up doing and be well-rounded. Well, I hope that's what all the program, I think that's what all the program directors. I've met a
So
lot of them. I've met so many program directors, you have no idea. Because we have these big conferences every April, where March, April, mostly April, where we all get together. It's like 500 people in the room. It's amazing. So one well-timed hand grenade could really wipe out medical education in America. But we all have. It's such a great group of people because we're all there to just like help people. You know, those people go into medicine to help patients, and we're all in the room to help the residents. You know, so it's
yeah.
a great vibe. It's great energy in that room.
Thank you for that, I guess. And so I guess I just had a question about because you brought up the topic of fellowship as a whole. And I guess people often say, it's great to go to a program that has a fellowship in whatever career track you want to do after residency, if that doesn't change during residency, of course. But I guess when it comes to Jacobi as a program itself, um, do you often see your graduates go on to competitive programs, or do they usually have to work on themselves more in order to earn spots, especially when it comes to competitive specialties?
So we are very honest, the fact that we only have hemonc and nephrology fellowship programs, and I think that's also right there on our website. And you can look these things up all over the internet, who has what fellowships. Our benefit is pretty much like exactly what I just said in the previous question of you could go to, I don't know, Mount Sinai, Morningside West, that combined one that used to be called St. Luke's Roosevelt, and they have some of their own fellowships, and go to there for the fellowship. Or you can come to Jacobi, where we don't have cardiology, or we don't have GI, like at Metropolitan Hospital in Manhattan. And yet our people, if you look at the lists we tweet every year, are staggering. And I'm not going to take credit for that because that predates me. That's more than 15 years. We have decades of reputation, I guess might be the right word, because of how we train our house staff with the autonomy and research, such that our house staff can walk into any fellowship and be in charge day one of whatever they need to do. That's the autonomy. They grow. They can boom, take over the service and run it in a specialty. And the research side again impresses those other fellowships that we don't have here. The cardiology ones all over the country, in Brigham and Women's and Beth Israel Deaconess and Johns Hopkins and Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic and all of these incredible places. MD Anderson for hemonc, one of our guys got into last year. I mean, it's like incredible what we can accomplish in that sense because of the connections we have. That's what a university program will bring you, even if they don't have the fellowships. They'll give you that chance to be in that room at the table. When my house staff come back from an interview day and they pop in and see me and I say, so how did it go, whatever, they said, well, there were 10 people around the table. This is when it was in person, of course. Now it's virtual, so it's a virtual table, but you get the idea. And 9 of those 10 were people from American medical schools before they went into residency, were people from these top programs in the country, Columbia, Cornell, Mount Sinai, NYU, whatever, from their residency. And us. Again, this isn't a 1-hour selling point for Jacobi, but my point is it does make a difference to come from the university programs if you're shooting for that kind of academic career at a top fellowship.
Thank you so much for this extensive answer. And so I guess moving on to our last question for the day, Mariana, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Ibrahim. So, Dr. Gutwein, just to wrap up our session, how should we choose the most meaningful experiences in our ERAS application? Do you think we should focus on the experiences we had in the US over the ones that we had in our home countries for IMGs, for example, or we should just follow our gut feeling in choosing really the most meaningful for us?
I mean, they did give you guys, I believe it was 10 last year, right, for the meaningful experiences.
Yes, now we have 10 experience to choose, and among these 10, we can choose 3 to highlight as most meaningful.
Right. I think even when they chose the 10 before this, like you can make these 3 your biggest ones, whatever. I think that was enough. I think they did a good job picking that number, because once you go over 10, you're probably talking about experiences that were these dinky little things that people threw in to pad up their resume to becoming 5 pages instead of 3. And most of those dinky ones really didn't add much, if anything, to be honest, to your chances to getting into a residency program. So the 10 was pretty reasonable. The fact that they now allow you to highlight 3, I think, is closer to the question you want to ask of how do we choose which 3 out of the 10 to highlight. That might be the more refined question there. And I don't honestly think that it should be just the ones from the US. Your IMGs that are probably mostly the IMGs that are listening to this. I mean, this is literally the clinical problem solvers IMG subsection, IMG match, whatever subsection. So, we all know the programs that are more IMG friendly, we know who you are. We know what we're getting. We like that. That's why we're doing that. So I don't think, only showing me the US experiences is going to be what impresses me. If you did a 3-year residency in internal medicine in India, for instance, as one of our chief residents right now has a 3-year residency in India before coming here, that's going to impress the hell out of me compared to a US exposure for, I don't know, some 1-month externship or something like that. If you had a 2-year PhD in China, they tend to be a little bit shorter in 2 to 3 years in China than in the US, where it might take 5 years or something. That's still going to impress me more than, I don't know, a 3-month research opportunity that you got in America. Actually, the 3-month thing in America might be another thing you would put on your 3 out of 10. But the point is, I would not exclude other country work that you did. I think some of those can be incredibly robust and really meaningful and really rank you higher towards getting an interview. You should probably at least consider out of those 3 showing something in research and something in clinical that was impressive, so that it's not all 3 in research or all 3 in clinical, if you can. Because some program directors, I'm probably not going to do this, but some program directors may look at those 3 as part of their screening tools for who to weed out. And maybe if those 3 don't include any US clinical exposure because you wanted to put in more robust research things in all 3, all of a sudden then that works against you. So be a little bit careful to be judicious about how you use it. But again, this is pretty new that they're saying, oh, pick 3 to highlight. It's a pretty new thing. So I don't want to pretend like I'm sure how this will get used by even myself at this point. More to come if you, I guess, re-interview me a year from now. But I leave that to you. I'm happy to come back.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Gutwein. And just for the sake of time, I think we'll be wrapping up this session. I would like to deeply thank you for dedicating your valuable time for asking our questions. And yes, please come back. You are welcome, and we are very thankful for you being here.
I'm happy to help, and hopefully I see some of you in ERAS and maybe even interview some of you. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us, and we see you tomorrow at VMR.
Yes, I joined the VMRs also. You should all listen.
Goodbye, everyone, and see you soon.
CPS rocks.